It's great to see some friendly faces around, so thank you very much for joining this session. What I'd like to talk to you about is how can we involve patients very early in the R&D process, even when we're still designing our drugs and different therapy treatments throughout the process. And I think that the title of the overall conference about that medicine is just the beginning is right about right. That's where I hear a lot of discussions. I've been around different presentations, and there are more and more talks around how can we actually move forward into a new thinking and a new way of working with different slides. Okay, so slides are there. Perfect. So think about broadly, and I think that also in the early opening remarks, we see slight convergence of industries. So we have been working in the pharma industry for, I don't know, for the last 20, 30 years or more in a very specific way, designing drugs, thinking about a sequential approach in moving forward, and then after, I don't know, 10 years or so, bring a drug to the market and thinking, how could this actually do well for our patients, do well by them, and get them feeling better and actually have them lead a normal life. Of course, in the recent years, there was a medtech industry that also blossomed and gave us a lot of electronic or medical device tools and so forth that has, and to an extent, some overlaps with the pharma industry, but it does serve a different purpose. What we're experiencing in the last 10 or 15 years is really the tech industry really blossoming up and kind of moving into this area as well. So the likes of Amazon, Google, Microsoft, and all the big players that are trying to move into this pharma area. And this creates definitely a lot of opportunities, difficulties, but also new areas of exploration throughout the industry. And yes, there are some talks about how could we see the next big pharma company being one of the tech industries and so forth, but that might not be the case, right? So a lot of pharma companies, medtechs, and so forth are there for a while. So there is a future where we're envisioning that there is an overlap. This definitely creates room and definitely new challenges in designing drugs and treatments broadly in a different way. And that's what we're here to see, right? So a first and foremost benefit is the personalized treatments. So we would be able to see how the convergence of these three industries together creates a room for personalized treatments, individualized ones. How can we actually use these sorts of treatments, therapies, and so forth to improve adherence of our own drugs as companion solutions or companion apps in some sort, or even digital therapeutics to a bigger extent. So we're seeing all this in the support of our patients, which are standing right there in the middle. And a lot of the different services, when they come together, actually build a storyline about how can we have an integrated care solution around them. How can we extend the benefit of our drugs even beyond the pill adherence or the pill taking of them throughout their normal lifestyle? How can we actually have them working with this 24/7 or 365 approach where we can actually monitor them, cure them, and actually have them in this integrated care approach. Of course, this creates a lot of different hurdles at the same time. Think about regulatory requirements, cycle times, which are larger in the pharma industry, whereas in the tech industry, they're very, very short, and there's always an overlap into how can we work with that? How can we learn from one another? And how can we actually build a better value proposition as we're moving forward in creating even new business models in this setup? And how can we all benefit from it? Because I think that at the very center of all this are the patients, the integrated care that I'm showing here with a shield. And what we are actually doing in Novartis is thinking how we can actually expedite this even more. So think about the overall standard of care for today and tomorrow. We have to think about how can we all collectively work in increasing that. How can we bring everyone together in that journey, working with our stakeholders, which are the payers, the suppliers, and regulators together to be able to build this storyline across the way where we can actually bring patients in a better and a much more healthy outcome, right? So In that journey, we need to partner with them. We need to even have a closer link with what payers are thinking, what their worries are, how can they think about decreasing their cost of disease burden, how can suppliers think about bringing in new devices, services, software, or anything else that is used today to bring this integrated care approach, and of course the regulators that have a hard job ahead of them because they have to deal with new ways of treatment, new ways of drug, new ways of drug plus digital approach, combination therapies, but even at an extent, digital therapeutics, which actually come together to even have their own value proposition as a drug would have today. And definitely we have to think about the healthcare professionals that are there as well, that we need to partner with because they today own and coach the patient. Patients move into their office today, they're prescribed them to some drugs. The healthcare professional and provider broadly thinks about them as a patient that needs to feel better, feel healthier, and lead a normal life, and they're acting as a coach around the clock, 365. But they also don't have the time to deal with everything. So they have a very short time frame today to be able to deal with each and every patient's personalized approach. So the data that actually being used in order to create this product and the privacy concerns that arise with it are also things that one needs to take into account when designing and when working into this landscape. Thinking a bit more about how to best build digital therapeutics, and at least for us in Novartis, we have been very vocal and public about the partnerships that we have today with external collaborators and so forth, but also how can we bring them into the pharma reality, in the pharma landscape today. And that's where we need to think about them as something that takes a lot that the drug has as a characteristic, but even building it and extending it even further. So we can think about reliable solutions, something that we can count on. It needs to be usable. And the thing that really separates it from anything else, it needs to be relevant. And relevance is a huge topic and concern today. We have a vast majority, I think 99% or more, of the technical solutions today have a drop-off rate after a month. So patients just don't use them. So how can we actually build something that's relevant, that answers a patient's needs in their own lifestyle in a personalized way? And I know that a lot of this is something that we're all kind of driving for, and it seems to be an elusive concept, but we need to get it right. We need to get it right because we owe that to our patients, we owe it to ourselves to be able to kind of move into this landscape together with them. Now, the thing that most of the pharma companies today think is that a lot of these solutions are companion apps at best, right? So there's a pill, there's a value proposition for the pill, and there's a companion app that actually works with the pill together to be able to build it and bring it to market to patients. There could be a future where some of these digital therapeutics are also working without a pill in some cases, or not necessarily to substitute the pill, but answering the needs of subpopulations that the pill does not address directly, or setting them up for a better treatment therapy along the way, or answering their needs when the pill would not across a daily lifestyle for a patient. So that's something that we also need to take into account when we're thinking about how we can actually deal with this new line of therapies overall. Let's take a step back and think about the cycle times, right? So in the pharma industry, and you know this, right? So to build a new drug, we need roughly 10 to 15 years. There's a long discovery process. There's an even longer trial process that needs to be in place that makes our drugs safe and efficacious. We move into an evaluation period, we bring them to market, and then there's a lot of studies also following this process. If we start thinking about digital therapeutics in a way, we need to think a bit different. So there are shorter discovery times, and that's where we also need to get the patient feedback. We need to introduce them to the value offering that we have at that early stage. In the previous world, we wouldn't be able to do that until we had reached a broader phase 3 study after, I don't know, 8 or 9 years since the first discovery process. This we need to expedite. We need to cut times shorter. And that's where we probably need to think about shorter trial times, short evaluation times, and then bringing it back to patients where we can have something that we're still trying to get our heads around. What's a V1? What's a version 1 of our digital therapy at that point, right? And having brought that forward, we need to think even more how we can actually even work further in this process, take this value proposition back to patients, think in another trial, shorter trial, evaluation period, and so forth, increase the value proposition until we know we have something right. And this right here is something that's really different in the DNA that we as pharma companies have. That quicker timeline, that quicker trial process to bring something in a much more efficacious and safety landscape is something that we're just not used in doing. So potentially we could even see a digital therapeutic or this product coming to market in a much shorter timeline. Even in 5 years, we could actually see this integrated care approach being in the hands of patients at that point. And the post-approval period is way longer, because even if you do bring it to patients' lives, you still need to kind of evolve it with them throughout their life and through the way that they're actually using it today. So having covered a bit more about where we're seeing this from a development process and learning a bit more from what the software world thinks about as a more agile approach built on design thinking technologies and so forth, we have to think about this in a much more elaborate way. So there's definitely a launch, soft launch, design and persevere option, right? So we build a prototype, we add additional features, we bring it to the market, we measure the patient insights, we see the actionable metrics that we can actually think on, and by design we actually learn what works, what doesn't, we keep the things that learn, and for those that don't, we actually pivot. We bring in new ideas, we revisit the patient journeys, we revisit the research, the early research that's in place, and having new data come in place, we also see new insights that we can use to draw assumptions that will actually build themselves into the new prototype. So it's a bit more complex as a process, but it's what you have to do to be able to build a digital therapeutic and bring it into the market in such a way. So a lot has to do with the team that's managing this. So usually we're having a very sequential approach. There's a team from a research point of view that thinks a lot about how can we discover the product that would actually work in an unmet need, how can we deliver the evidence that needs to be made in order to make it robust enough to move into the second stage, think about the clinical trials and so forth. Then you usually develop a much more safe and efficacious value proposition. You move through regulatory in a way that you can actually think that what I'm doing makes sense, it's valuable for patients out there. And before launch, you're starting to think about HEOR, health economics, payer contracts, or even how can you actually detail this, what the field was going to think about this, how our physicians going to think about this, and to be able to bring this to patients eventually. Now, to build such a solution, you kind of bring all this process into a very flat line. You need to work in all these areas simultaneously, and that's the difficulty. Because at the same time, you're discovering something new, you're building the evidence for it, thinking on whether it would move in a market in a way that makes sense for patients. It needs to be compliant by regulatory standards, and of course, you need to be able to keep all the payers and the other suppliers up to date about the new contractual agreements and everything else that needs to come in place. So it's a whole new different process, and you need a team that kind of expands through multiple areas throughout a company that traditionally have not been speaking to one another. So you need a team that sees across research, development, and commercial all the way along the way till they are able to provide something for patients. And this is different. And this is something that we in Novartis is looking as a different process and actually prototyping as we're moving into this area. Think about how we can actually look overall about the benefits and challenges into moving into this area. So we're thinking that personalized treatments, of course, is something that we all feel is very beneficiary, and it would definitely work for patients. Adherence would do wonders for our drugs. for patients and overall for the overall increase of health in a broader society. Integrated care, cutting timelines to market in a very short time frame and thinking how we can actually get things earlier out there, and of course receiving early patient feedback along the way, even from the very beginning of the R&D process. So the R&D process becomes part of the commercial process, and the commercial process resides a lot and depends on the early R&D process to be able to close the loop as we're actually moving this forward. So there are challenges, so this is not a clear-cut road. We're still learning, we're adapting, and we're taking an approach that today we understand that cultural changes are hard because we need to think in a different way. Taking this solution up our senior management, but also middle and lower country management as well, is a difficult task to do. And how you align all these groups together is also something that is very, very different. Also, from a pharma perspective, this process learns and takes a lot from a consumer-like mindset. So we need to think a bit more like consumer companies, and we in the pharma world just don't have it. So maybe think about partnership options or having someone that knows how to do this best, because the not built here syndrome I don't think applies in this setup, right? So we need to be able to be much more open and thinking differently. Now, last 2 points I'd like to make is that it's very difficult to recruit for such a team. The talent that one needs to attract to be able to work across this landscape is different, it's diverse. You have to bring clinicians, commercial folks, drug development folks, talking the same language and aligning on what is expected of them throughout the journey. So being able to have this very diverse setup and team is very difficult to set up. And last but not least, we're seeing a lot of examples on new companion apps, digital therapeutics broadly, and so forth, being brought to market. I haven't seen one yet that has a very clear reimbursement path, and I know that we're seeing a lot of solutions being there today. There's an expedited FDA process to move these into the market. There are also payers that are much more willing to look into how we could do it. But this is an area that we could all become much better in. And that's where the stakeholder management is fantastic to work with in order to make this a much more credible solution for everyone. So with that said, I'd like to thank you for your time, and thank you very much.